Hello, this is Michele from Simply Scaife Hand Made with a video about tips and techniques for hand quilting. As I think back over the many years that I've been hand quilting and in teaching some people hand quilting, several different questions have come across my path. Some of these were my own questions and some are questions from other people. One of the first questions that I get asked all of the time is, how do I know if I have a really good thimble? And for me, a thimble has to be comfortable, it has to fit well, and it has to be just something that, it's not going to irritate or rub your skin, but another mark of a really, really good thimble is the dimpling. I don't know if you can see on this one, but it has just a couple rows of dimples. But the dimples are really, really deep. And the reason that I like really deep dimples is because that is what gives you control over your needle when you're quilting. So let's take our needle and do a little quilting so I can show you what I mean about the dimples on the thimble. You want to be able to rest the tip of that needle with your dimples on your thimble. So it goes down into the fabric, and as you can tell, the thimble is holding and grabbing that needle while I rock my hand back and I rock it back up. My finger is not what is controlling this thimble. It is actually the dimples in here. So as I push it through, I've got very good control over my needle while I work. There's not any slipping. If that needle slips, it could poke me, and that wouldn't be very pleasant. I've worked with needles in the past that had lesser grooves, and I have had trouble with it slipping. So when you want a good thimble, you need to find one that you're really comfortable with and one that has, in my opinion, really good dimpling on it so that you have the most control over your needle. This week we've been looking at the clamshell, and one of the concerns that I personally had when I started quilting a curved shape was that often I would get going and I'd look back and realize that maybe my curve had some funny angles to it. And when I talked to some other quilters about it, they told me that I really needed to slow down and take smaller stitches. Now that doesn't necessarily mean the width or the space between. They meant loading your needle. And loading our needle means that when we do our rock and hill, when we take our motion, this here is called loading the needle. It's putting stitches on that needle. So as you can see here, I've only loaded 2 stitches onto the needle before pushing it all the way through and pulling that thread. So what they were trying to tell me and what I've learned is when you're working on a curved shape versus a straight line, you really only want to take 2 or 3 stitches on the needle at one time. You only want to load 2 or 3 at a time, because otherwise you end up with those little boxy, odd shapes. When you're working a straight line, you can load as many stitches as you're comfortable with, but with a curve, you really don't want to load very many. Another thing that I've been asked over the years is, when I'm quilting, some people have concerns or problems poking the bottom finger. And all I can tell you is that my bottom finger, it isn't where the needle pokes down. My bottom finger is just pushing the fabric up. It isn't actually being poked by the needle. Once the needle goes into the fabric, right now, my middle finger is underneath there so that I can push that through. But when I start actually putting the needle in, my finger is to the back, so it's over here, so that I can push it through. Once I know that I've got that needle all the way through the layers of my quilt, that finger from behind rocks forward and just kind of helps push up the fabric so that the needle will go through. I'm not actually poking the hand underneath with that needle. Some people do. If you do it over time, you will get a really nice callus there that will help prevent. If you find that you are poking that finger, there are little sticky tabs that are called, I believe they're called adhesive thimbles, that you can stick on your finger that will kind of help you until you build up a callus. I don't have one, and that's because I don't poke my finger with the needle underneath. It's just, that is how I do it, but my finger is actually behind the needle when it goes in. It's not ever making contact with the tip of my needle. It's behind it. And then again with this thumb, it's in front of it, but not in a situation where I'm getting poked by the needle. Alright, another question that I get asked sometimes is, I've come to the end of this, and my next pattern doesn't start here, it starts up here, so what do I do? We call this traveling, and what you basically do is go through the fabric right where you came out. You want to make contact with the batting in the middle, but not go all the way through to the back of the fabric. And you just want to kind of sneak up between the layers of the quilt layers, and travel under, coming out where you wanted to go. And then we can start from here. Basically, it's, if you're machine quilting, traveling would be taking in your machine and stitching down here, stitching back exactly on top of your stitching and coming back. But when you hand quilt, you don't want to stitch on top, you just want to slide under, and like I said, you're going between the layers, you're between the top and the bottom. You kind of want to make contact with the batting, but you want to make sure that your needle isn't coming all the way through the back to leave a big mark. Another thing that I get asked quite often is about stopping. When I want to stop my thread and I'm finished or I've run out of thread, one tip is don't wait till you have only an inch of thread left to tie off. You want to have a good section of thread left. Otherwise it's going to be a little bit difficult to make the knot. And what I do is, just where I've stopped, I want to hold my thread like this, and I want to take my needle and wrap it around 3 times. And I want to bring that as close to the fabric as I can. And I'm going to gently work my needle through and pull that thread ever so carefully until it comes to a knot. I want to take my thread, go right back into the very spot I'd been stitching, go between the layers of the fabric, and if I'm stitching in this direction, I go perpendicular out. And we just need to scooch over about a fingernail width, push it through, and when you come to the needle, you want to give it a little tug, and it pops, and it'll go right in there and hide in the